G'day battlers, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Galar Cup Great League Edition, which is coming to the Go Battle League from October 1st to October 8th. Now, the Galar Cup is essentially just any Pokemon that is available in the Pokemon Sword and Shield Pokedex, but raise your hand if you were able to name every single Pokemon on that list without making any mistakes. I see a few of you have raised your hands, and to that I just have to say, nerd! But really, I think we just have to dive straight into the meta and take a look at what is actually going to be good, what we can expect to see, and how it's all going to play out when we get into this meta in just a couple days' time. But super quick plug before we get into it, almost 90% of you are not currently subscribed, and so if this sort of content is helpful to you, if you want to see these meta infographics every week, because there is going to be a new meta sort of every week for the next month that we are going to be putting out a video for, do go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss a single one of them if they're helpful to you. But with that said, let's just dive straight in and take a look at the Galar Cup Great League Edition. And of course, we have to get the thumbnail shot, so perfect. Now we have 5 main groups on the graphic, and we've got a few other Pokemon that we're going to be talking about towards the end of the video as well. So essentially we just have to start at the PvPoke rank 1, and is going to be Galarian Weezing smack bang in the center of the graphic. Now on PvPoke, Shadow Galarian Weezing is actually the PvPoke rank 1. It's not regular Galarian Weezing. Now if you're watching this video early in the first couple of days that it's been released, then good news, you've got time, because you need to evolve a Shadow Coughing right now. If you evolve a Shadow Coughing during this current event until October 1st, 8 PM local time, I think it is, then you'll be able to evolve it into a Shadow Galarian Weezing, and you'll have the #1 PvPoke Pokemon for this cup. If you're watching this a little bit too late and you didn't evolve a Shadow Coughing into a Shadow Galarian Weezing, unfortunately you're just not going to be able to get one, but it means that you'll just be using a regular Galarian Weezing if you do have access to it. Maybe sort of ask around, see if someone can trade one to you. Unfortunately, you cannot trade Shadows, but normal Galarian Weezing does most of the things that Shadow Galarian Weezing does. A Shadow Galarian Weezing just hits a little bit harder, and there are a few matchups in this meta that the Shadow form is able to win, but we'll talk about that as the video goes on. But essentially, let's talk about Weezing. So what is it actually able to do? #1, it's able to beat the fairy types. Now, it is poison fairy type itself, and by having that poison typing, it just gives it that edge, being able to resist the fairy moves coming its way, and it is able to beat Clefable, Alola Ninetales, and Togetic that are up in this top right-hand fairy group. Worth noting that Galarian Weezing, its sort of recommended moveset is actually going to be Fairy Wind, Play Rough, Brutal Swing being its spammy move, and Fairy Wind actually adding up quite a bit of damage these days. So it doesn't actually have any poison moves that it's going to be recommended. It does have access to some, but it's not the PvPoke recommended moveset, but you're still just able to out-damage these fairy Pokemon while you're not taking very much damage towards yourself. You're also able to beat Mandibuzz because you do have that fairy damage. You could sort of make some side grades, like you could decide to bring Overheat instead of Play Rough. You're not going to have as good a matchup into the Mandibuzz, for example. It's still not that bad, but you might be able to pick up some other matchups. You might have a really strong matchup into the Alola Ninetales, for example, but it's all about side grades. You can sort of pick your poison depending on how your team is sort of built. Now, how do you beat Galarian Weezing, the #1 Pokemon in the meta? 2 different ways. So #1 is the group in the bottom left-hand corner, and that is the ground types. Ground, super effective into poison, and there's no levitate ability in Pokemon Go at the moment. So a couple of ground types. The big one is going to be Diggersby, who I believe is rank 2 on PvPoke at the moment. There's also Gastrodon and Golurk doing big mud slap damage, and you've also got access to Quagsire or Shadow Quagsire for that really spammy charge attacks as well. All really solid counters to Galarian Weezing. You've also got another route, and that is through the other poison types. So like Drapion, I'm just going to say Drapion, let's be real here. We've also got Quillfish and also Toxapex. Now, it does get a little bit dicey here in that the Shadow Galarian Weezing can actually beat Drapion. So again, this is sort of one of the benefits of Shadow Galarian Weezing. You're just able to output a little bit more damage, but for the most part, I guess Drapion isn't necessarily the #1 poison you might want to go for. Toxapex feels like the #1 poison type to me in this particular meta, especially because you've just got so much bulk. You're able to output quite a bit of damage onto the entire field. So that's essentially Galarian Weezing in a nutshell. It's able to get to moves really spammy, and it pretty much threatens the entire meta some way or another. Now let's talk about the fairy types. We've sort of talked about every group in a little bit, so we'll speed run through this a little bit. So the fairies are able to beat up Mandibuzz, which is expected because it is that dark type. They're then going to lose to the poison types because, that's what fairies do. It's not really their forte. When it comes to the ground types, though, you'll see there isn't an arrow between the fairy group and the ground types in the bottom left. It's a little bit back and forth. So Alola Ninetales is able to beat Diggersby and Golurk, but then it loses to Quag and Gastrodon because, they don't care about the ice damage quite as much with their water typing. You've then got Clefable, which is able to beat Golurk and Quagsire. Generally, you're going to lose to Gastrodon and Diggersby, though. You'll actually also lose to Shadow Golurk, because Shadow Golurk, the Mud Slaps, are just going to add up that little bit more. And then Togetic can basically beat them all because it does resist the ground typing, because Togetic, I think that's Togetic. Togetic? I'm going to call it Togetic still. Correct me in the comments, I guess. But it can lose to Quagsire. Shadow Quagsire if it has the Stone Edge. Shadow Quagsire Stone Edge does just enough damage that it is going to lose. Regular Quagsire, I think it can actually tank one, so it's not the end of the world, but yeah, Quagsire might want to run Stone Edge just for, the Togetics, but also for the Mandibuzzes in this particular manner. Then I guess that's the fairy types in a nutshell. You've got Mandibuzz, loses the fairies, generally beats the ground because again you are resisting them. And then again there's no arrow between Mandibuzz and the poison types because it is a little bit back and forth. Mandibuzz is able to beat Drapion and Quillfish, but generally is going to lose to Toxapex, which is again one of the big reasons why Toxapex probably the best poison type outside of Galarian Weezing to run in this particular meta, because you can beat the two big meta threats, Galarian Weezing and Mandibuzz, because Mandibuzz is just a very bulky Pokemon. It's weird that Mandibuzz is good because there are so many fairies running around, but it just has so much bulk. It is actually pretty decent in this particular meta. Ground types, they lose to Mandibuzz, they beat the poisons because they're super effective, and we talked about the fairy matchups before. And then the poison types, they beat the fairies, they lose to the ground types, and against the Mandibuzz, we just talked about that before as well. So that is sort of the main meta infographic, and I think it's going to describe a lot of the matchups that you will see in the Galar Cup, but they're not the only Pokemon that are going to be running around and might be really good. So let's talk about another few, starting from the very bottom corner, Abomasnow. Abomasnow, you've got that really interesting ice damage, which can actually hit quite a bit of the meta. You're going to hit things like Mandibuzz. You've got some ability to actually beat Galarian Weezing because it isn't running any poison moves, so you've got some ability to win there. You can actually kind of get wins across the entire board. You get a little bit stuck against something like a Toxapex. Toxapex, again, proving why it's really strong. So it's not like Abomasnow isn't the king Pokemon, pretty much because poison exists. We also have Ninetales, which feels a little bit out of place to me in this particular meta, but it is ranked relatively highly. I want to say it's like number 10-ish, somewhere around there on the PV Poke rankings. You do have good matchups into the ice types like Alola Ninetales and Abomasnow. You've got ability to sort of do a lot of damage to something like Clefable. You also do have that ability to add up damage onto like Galarian Weezing as well, because you aren't really taking super effective damage from a lot of these Pokemon. The Mud Boys do sort of get you against the wall a little bit, as do the Toxapex and the Quillfish. Drapion, not the best matchup either because it has Aqua Tail. We then have Dusknoir hanging out over here. Dusknoir has Astonish. Astonish has been buffed like we've seen in the last couple of metas, and there's not a lot of Pokemon in this meta that do resist its damage. Mandibuzz, not a great matchup for it, and so, you might get stuck in some sort of RPS scenarios. Diggersby is also, it's not the best Pokemon to match up against, but it's pretty highly ranked on PvPoke, so I just thought I would include it here. Drifloon is a little bit more interesting to me as a ghost type because you do have access to Icy Wind, so you have that ability to really fight back against something like the Mandibuzz. You can really set up your other Pokemon for success. You've also got access to Mystical Fire, which could be a little bit interesting, but it feels like Shadow Ball probably the way to go in this particular meta. And yeah, there's a few things like Drapion that you're not going to have a great time against either, but you have a pretty decent time against the rest of the board, except for the ice types, who also you are going to struggle against. There's also Gallade. Gallade is a kind of an interesting Pokemon. I don't know how well it's going to do, but you do have that sort of, really, really spammy Leaf Blade to hit the Mud Boys with. That could be quite interesting. You've also got some big and Nuka potential, so maybe it's good. Pangoro is sort of around on the rankings as well. I didn't include it down here, but because I don't think it's going to be that good, to be honest. I again, there's fairies running around, there's a flyer that's running around, there's poison types that generally are going to be resisting the fighting damage. I'm not quite sure why it is so highly ranked on PvPoke. It's at like number 16 or something, but you know, it's around. But really, that's sort of all I've got to say about the Galar Cup Great League Edition. So if I've missed anything, do let me know in the comments down below, because I'm sure there is some spice Pokemon, or not even spice. Like I've just missed something major that is going to be good in this meta. So do definitely let me know. And let me know if you were able to actually get a Shadow Galarian Weezing. I had to go find a Shadow Coughing raid. So if you don't have a Shadow Coughing and you're watching this video in the first 2 days, go find a Shadow Coughing raid, like now. But with that said, I want to give a massive thank you to my YouTube members and Patreon subscribers as well for being absolutely lovely human beings. But yeah, so stay tuned. Next week, we're going to have another meta simplified for, I think it's the Sunshine Cup that's coming up next up. And yeah, again, there's going to be a new meta every single week. And in this max out update, no meta is going to be quite like it was before. So stay tuned and subscribe if you haven't already, because again, 90% is a big number. So, you know, let's fix that by the next one.